My name is Chris. I am 38 years old and a captain in the United States Army. I have spent nearly 2 decades wearing the same uniform, carrying the same values my father taught me long before I ever stood on a parade ground. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's business and where hard work was not something to be praised, it was simply expected. My parents never had much, but what they gave me was discipline, respect, and a sense of duty that would shape the rest of my life. From the time I was a kid, I believed in doing the right thing even when no one was watching. I helped my father in the garage, watched my mother juggle 2 jobs, and promised myself that one day I would make them proud. Joining the Army felt like the natural next step. It gave me structure, a purpose, and a brotherhood I had never experienced anywhere else. It also gave me the chance to serve something bigger than myself. But beyond the medals and ranks, what truly mattered to me was love. I met her when we were both 17. She was my high school sweetheart, the one who made the world feel calm when everything else was chaos. We dreamed about building a life together, talking about a small house, kids, and maybe a dog. I believed we were unbreakable. Through every deployment, every move, every sacrifice, she was my reason to come home. I used to think love and loyalty were enough to protect everything that mattered. At 38, I still believed that. Back then, I didn't know that sometimes even the strongest oaths can be broken by time, distance, and human weakness. But before all that, I was just a soldier, a husband, and a man who thought his life was built on solid ground. When I got the deployment order, I remember sitting at the kitchen table, holding her hand, promising we'd make it through. It wasn't the first time I'd been sent overseas, but this one felt heavier. 18 months in the Middle East. A year and a half away from everything familiar, from her. She smiled, told me she'd wait like she always had. I believed her. I kissed her goodbye at the airport, wearing my uniform and carrying every ounce of trust I had left. The first few months were hard but manageable. We emailed, FaceTimed when the signal allowed, and sent care packages back and forth. Then slowly, her messages became shorter. Calls went unanswered. She said she was busy with work, overwhelmed with projects. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned everything. I told myself she was just tired, just trying to stay afloat like I was. I clung to the image of her waiting back home, sitting on the porch we once painted together, dreaming of our next chapter. Halfway through my deployment, a brown envelope arrived at the base. Inside was a letter from a lawyer. No explanation, no conversation, just a petition for divorce. I stared at that letter for hours, reading the same lines over and over. At first, I thought it was a mistake. It had to be. We hadn't even had a serious argument before I left. My heart pounded, not with rage, but with a cold, empty ache. I felt like someone had cut a wire inside me. Something vital had snapped. I called her that night. She answered, her voice low and flat. She didn't cry. She didn't stumble over her words. She told me she couldn't live in the waiting anymore, that she had changed. She said she hoped I would understand. I couldn't respond. I didn't even know where to begin. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time, letting the noise of the bass fade into the background. It felt like a different kind of war had just started, one I hadn't trained for. I found out later, through a mutual friend, that she had been seeing her boss. It wasn't just an emotional affair. She had moved in with him barely a month after I deployed. The man owned the company she worked for, older, wealthy, stable in ways I wasn't when I wore combat boots and came home with sand in my ears. She didn't just want out of the marriage, she wanted out of the life we built together. She used my absence as a clean break, rewriting her story with someone else while I was halfway across the world trying to stay alive. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to let the anger eat me alive. But I didn't. That's not who I am. I buried it deep, like every other wound I couldn't show. I kept waking up every morning at 0500, cleaning my rifle, briefing my unit, leading missions. I did my job. I held the line. I reminded myself that falling apart wouldn't bring anything back, that the man I used to be, the man she left, still had a purpose. Even if it was no longer tied to her. There were nights I couldn't sleep. I'd stare at the tent ceiling, replaying the last few weeks of our marriage, trying to pinpoint the moment it all went wrong. But there was no one moment. It was a slow erosion, the kind that eats away quietly until nothing's left. And yet, even in that pain, I refused to let it define me. She may have walked away, but I was still standing, still fighting, and I promised myself that when I came home, I'd start over, no matter how much it hurt. Coming back felt nothing like the movies. There was no banner, no hug waiting at the gate, no home to return to. The house had been sold during the divorce, and all that was left in my name was an old pickup, a duffel bag of gear, and about $600 in my checking account. My friends from town had drifted or disappeared. I'd been gone too long, and most didn't know what to say anymore. I slept in the truck the first few nights, parked behind a 24-hour gym that didn't ask questions when I came in to shower. She, on the other hand, was thriving. New photos floated around social media, weekend trips to wine country, a BMW she didn't have when I left, and the same man who'd once been her boss now introducing her as his fiancé. I could have let that image eat me alive, but I didn't. I blocked her, shut it all out, and found the nearest construction site hiring day laborers. I showed up at 5 a.m., kept my head down, and worked until my hands split open. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. For the first time in months, I was earning my own money again, one wheelbarrow at a time. A foreman named Dale noticed I wasn't like the other guys. He asked about the army, then about my plans. I didn't have any. He pointed to a clipboard and said if I wanted to stop breaking my back, I'd better start using my head. That night, I looked up community colleges. I found out veterans were eligible for tuition assistance. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a classroom full of 18-year-olds, learning calculus and drafting plans on cheap software. It was humbling, and I was terrible at first, but I stuck with it. My days were long job site from 6 to 3, class from 5 to 9. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and slept in a rented room above a tire shop. No vacations, no distractions, just work, just rebuilding. Within 3 years, I earned my associate's degree, then transferred to a university to finish a bachelor's in civil engineering. There were times I wanted to quit. Nights I'd stare at blueprints and wonder if any of this was worth it. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the man she left. I was determined to become someone even I would admire. After graduation, I landed an internship at a mid-sized construction firm in Chicago. That's where I met Paul. He was one of the founding partners, sharp, demanding, but fair. He pushed me harder than anyone had, but he also saw something in me. Maybe it was discipline, maybe it was grit, or maybe he just respected a man who didn't whine. Either way, he became more than a boss. He became my mentor. Under his wing, I rose from intern to project coordinator, then to site manager, and eventually to VP of operations. By the time I was 36, I was sitting at the executive table, making decisions that shaped skylines. I had a corner office, a team of engineers reporting to me, and contracts worth millions on my desk. But what mattered more than all that was knowing I had built this version of myself from the ground up. No shortcuts. No help from someone else's bank account or family name. Just sweat, humility, and the will to keep going when everything in me wanted to stop. I came home to nothing, and piece by piece, I built a new life that no one could take from me. We were finalizing the acquisition of a small marketing agency that had been struggling for over a year. Their numbers were sinking fast, and their leadership had made a mess of the books. My company had been negotiating to buy them out, clean house, and fold the useful parts into our structure. I was sent in to oversee the transition, review their staff, and determine who would stay. When I opened the employee roster, halfway down the list was a name I hadn't seen in years. Her name, my ex-wife. I stared at it for a long time, as if it might disappear if I blinked. There was no mistaking it. Same middle initial. Same last 4 digits of the employee ID they kept on record from her last job. I leaned back in my chair, letting the reality settle in. Of all the places, Of all the companies we could have acquired, she was here. Not as a director or partner, but as a mid-level account manager. No leadership title, no influence, just a name on a list at a failing agency we were about to dismantle. The day of the meeting, I walked into the conference room early. I stood at the head of the table, reviewing slides on a screen while people filed in, one by one. She came in late, hair tied back, blazer wrinkled, a laptop clutched against her chest like a shield. When she looked up and saw me, the blood drained from her face, her eyes locked with mine, and I watched panic ripple across her features like a tremor. She sat down slowly, barely breathing. I didn't say a word. I nodded once and continued with the presentation. She didn't speak during the meeting. She kept her head down, typing notes she'd never send. I could feel the tension coming off her like static. She knew what this meant. She knew I had the power now, not just over her job, but over the narrative she thought she'd rewritten. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, she had walked away from me for someone with money and position. Now, she was hoping I wouldn't notice her name on a list of people about to be evaluated for layoffs. After the meeting, I reviewed her file. She'd been through 2 jobs since her last promotion. She had no major wins, no strong recommendations. Her performance reviews were average, and she'd recently taken unpaid leave, likely for personal or financial reasons. The man she left me for was no longer in her life. That much I'd learned through the industry rumor mill. They had split 2 years prior, and she hadn't recovered financially since. She was living in a small rental outside the city, defaulting on credit cards, clawing her way through a career that never really took off. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. I felt something colder. Not revenge, exactly, but recognition. The kind that comes when the pieces line up in a way no one planned. She had made her choices. And now, fate had looped us back to this table, with me on one side and her on the other. I had to decide whether she would stay or go, whether to make her face what she ran from, or walk away and pretend she never mattered. Either way, the next move was mine. When the final list of terminations landed on my desk, her name was at the top. Based on performance, financial impact, and team redundancy, cutting her would have made perfect sense. No one would have questioned it. It would have been clean, expected, and maybe even satisfying to some. But I didn't sign off right away. I sat there, pen in hand, staring at that line of text like it held more weight than all the others combined. I thought back to the night I received her divorce papers, to the silence that followed, to the way I'd rebuilt myself brick by brick while she erased every trace of what we once had. I could have erased her just as easily. One stroke of ink, one polite exit package, and she'd be gone again. But something in me hesitated, not because I felt pity, not because I wanted to forgive or reconnect. I simply wanted her to understand the value of what she once took for granted, the weight of responsibility, the meaning of service. So I made a call. I pulled her into a new role. I reassigned her to a community project I had been quietly funding through the company's outreach division. It was a fund to support homeless veterans transitioning back into civilian life. The job would require long hours, coordination with shelters, and grant proposals. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't high profile, but it mattered. It served a cause I cared deeply about, and it would place her face to face with stories like mine, men and women trying to rebuild from nothing. When she walked into my office for the reassignment meeting, she looked nervous, confused. I told her the truth, that I wasn't interested in revenge, that I didn't keep her on out of mercy. I kept her on, because for once, she'd have to fight for something real. She'd have to pour herself into work that couldn't be faked. She nodded slowly, not saying much, but in her eyes, I saw something shift. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was realization. Or maybe it was just the first crack in the wall she'd built to protect herself from who she used to be. I didn't tell anyone in the office about our past. I didn't need to. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about holding up a mirror, letting her see not just who I had become, but what she had lost. And not in wealth or title or power. In character, in resilience, in purpose. I gave her the job because it was hard, because it demanded empathy, because it required the kind of quiet strength she once ignored and now had to learn from the ground up. Weeks went by. I saw her stay late. I overheard her on calls, learning to talk with people who'd seen more darkness than she ever would. I watched her stumble through the early mistakes, then start to find her footing. I didn't interfere. I didn't praise. I just observed. And in doing so, I found something that surprised me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but a quiet sense of peace. Not because she was changing, but because I had. For the first time, I wasn't the man she left behind. I wasn't the soldier scraping himself off the floor. I was the one who had made it through the fire and come out the other side. Stronger, clearer. And now, I had the power not to destroy, but to shape. And I chose to build. Not for her, for me. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not making someone suffer. It's letting them see who you became without them. I never got an apology. And truthfully, I stopped waiting for one a long time ago. I didn't need her to admit what she did or ask for forgiveness. I wasn't looking for closure, or validation, or some final moment where everything made sense. What I wanted, what I fought for was peace. The kind that doesn't come from payback, but from knowing you did the hard thing, the right thing, even when no one would have blamed you for choosing the opposite. Forgiveness didn't mean she deserved it. It meant I refused to carry her choices any further into my future. I let go, not for her, but for the man I had become. A man who survived heartbreak, betrayal, and starting over with nothing. A man who had learned to lead without letting pain turn him bitter. She thought I'd ruin her, that I'd make her regret everything. But that's not who I am, and it never was. I didn't ruin her. I gave her the chance to see who she really was. And that, in the end, is far more powerful than anything I could have taken away.